Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming back and joining us on day 2. I hope you all slept well. Yeah. Who didn't sleep well? The 26-hour people who were traveling for 26 hours, you weren't tired enough. Good, I'm glad that you still managed to make it back. Thank you for joining us again for day 2. Today is our opportunity to dive much more deeply into 3 topics. This morning, we'll start off with paratransit. After lunch, we'll go into active modes. And then in the afternoon, we'll go into the topic of integrating land use planning and transit. Each of the sessions has almost 3 hours, so we have quite a long time to. You were very patient and listened a lot yesterday, and then today is an opportunity to also be a little bit more of an active participant. So without delaying too much, I will invite Faila Sufa, Urban Development Specialist at the ADB, to come join me on stage and take over as the moderator for your first session on. Friendly reminder for everyone, all of the bio. Hello? Yeah, okay, this one works.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. So we'll start today workshop with a highly significant and maybe the most challenging part of public transport, which is dealing with paratransit. It's very headache. And in many Asian cities, paratransit mostly serve as a mode of urban mobility, especially where there may be limited or no other public transport option available. Therefore, paratransit reform becomes a critical step in improving transportation service, making them more comfortable and then viable and also safer. And we'll have 2 sessions today. First is a presentation we will have 2 presenters. First presenter will be Pablo Salazar Ferro. He will share about paratransit and its modernization, lesson learned from several cities in Africa and also Latin America. And then second presentation from Imran Khan, bus industry transition program study case from Peshawar BRT project. And then after that, we will have a tea break and we'll continue with the panel discussion. So without further ado, Pablo, you may begin your presentation. You have 40 minutes.
Hello, everyone, and good morning. And thank you, Farah, for the presentation. So I'll be talking about paratransit, and I will be trying to present it in a big overview approach. So I'm not going to go into the details of paratransit. The idea was more to paint a picture of what it is and to best understand how paratransit fits into this whole SUMP program. Thank you. It's a good thing that I have a clock in front of me, just in case you are wondering what I'm looking at. So, because 40 minutes is difficult to keep up when you're talking. And yes, some other thing that I need to point out before I begin is that sometimes I need to walk when I talk, and I'm not going to be able to stand there and talk. So I'll be walking here. Sorry if I show my back to you. And one last thing is that as I just said, I'm not an expert on paratransit in Asian cities. I've been working on African and Latin American cities. So any position that you want to have and to add to the presentation is more than welcome. And I think we will have the time to do so after I'm done with the whole presentation. So we organized this with Clément that I talked to for this presentation into 4 main chapters. So first is just to figure out what we're talking about. Paratransit as a term is quite loose. So we need to figure out what it entails, what is behind that term. Then we'll go more into what tools exist to enact reform of the paratransit sector. And then using an example that we chose from a city that you will see later on, explain how that can come about. And finally, just look at the 3 axes of reform that we have identified from the beginning in terms of what paratransit can be and how reform can be included in mobility plans, in SUMPs. So first is just defining what paratransit is. And I'm guessing you've seen this slide many, many times in figuring out why do we call it paratransit, something that was previously called the informal transport sector. So the informal transport sector was not like the good term because it wasn't precise enough. And someone else came up with paratransit. But now if you talk to UITP, they're trying to encourage the term popular transport. So there's still a bit of a discussion with what it entails, what does paratransit mean? And if you go outside the Anglophone speaking countries, you will find even more terms to define this type of services. In French is the transport artisanal. I'm not going to even attempt to translate it because artisanal is a very difficult word to translate. And then if you go to Latin America, you will find alternative transport or traditional transport. And that is easier to translate in a way to English. But in all, this definition is actually define something that is not precise at all. If you ask me to define what paratransit is in a couple of words, I will say any service, any public transport services that are not formal. And so that gives you the wide range you can have. And that wide range can be defined in terms of regulations. Are these services regulated or not? Are they how they are organized? Are they informal or not? Because some of them are quite formal businesses. And then in the end, what type of operations are they running? Is it the scheduled operations? Do they have frequencies? Is it just on-demand services? How does this work? So all these definitions of these terms can be included in the definition, and that becomes even more complex as a term. The other thing you can look at is what vehicles are involved, and that is somewhat interesting to look at, because you might imagine that different regions in the world have different paratransit services and different approaches to paratransit. And you might try to generalize how it looks like. So if you look, for instance, at Latin America, you will find big buses that are, by definition, paratransit. And you can go up all the way up to motor taxis. And in the Middle East, you will find mostly collective taxis. In Africa, you will, again, find a wide range. And in Asia, you will find a wide range. But that's just a generalization, because it's so hard to point out how the system works, that once you go into each city or even each country, you will see that differences are still enormous within one single region and even one single country. So with the help of Clément, again, because I'm not an expert on this in Asia, we try to come up with a way to define this, to explain this difficulty in the definition of the term by presenting you a couple of examples. So in the Philippines, you can go from the jeepneys to the pedicabs. And this is, so once again, you have a wide range, but you can also have the cases in Vietnam where you have one single vehicle, which is the motor taxi. So again, for each city, a very different context, a very different system that has historically developed is now working on each territory. Then another important element in understanding what paratransit is who is behind that term and who is running the show behind the scenes. So first is, who's there? And at the minimum, and once you go into understanding what stakeholders might be in the paratransit sector, you will have an owner, and then you'll have a driver, and often you will have a union on top of that. So it's a very hierarchical system. But that's just the minimum you might have, because on each city, you will have many, many other jobs and stakeholders and persons that are involved in the system. For instance, in Morocco, the license holder is not even the owner of the vehicle, and it doesn't have to be a driver of the system either. There's just one person holding the license that is split, and so that adds up a bit of a complexity layer to it. And then you will have, for instance, drivers that hire other drivers to run the vehicle. And you will have people working in the ranks or in the terminals, telling people where to go and when to go to a certain vehicle in it. And all those jobs are actually create layers and layers and layers and layers on top of layers that make that paratransit system so complex to understand. Yet there are a couple of inefficiencies that you will point out quite easily. And it all comes back to that being excessively dependent on daily income. So the driver, who is at the heart of the problem, will get an income from selling places or fares or whatever you want to call it to get into the bus. That revenue is then split into the driver, people helping the driver, then it goes up to the owner, and then it goes up to the unions. But the point of entry is the driver, and I'll show you a slide later on that. And so that kind of a very daily based revenue system is actually an obstacle for paratransit fleet renewal, because you don't know how much money you're going to get, and actually revenues are not that great. So in that sense, well, owners are not really encouraged to renew their fleet. Unions are just encouraged to collect money in a way, and they play a role, but they play a very difficult to define role. Unions have a logic in the system. They can exist. There's an interest in having unions in the system. However, unions should not be able to take on operations of the system, and that's often what happens. They often are deciding where to run the vehicle and deciding on operational choices that they should not be involved in. And then at the other end of the scale, you will have very reduced ways or low quality jobs that become important in the system. Cleaning the vehicle, selling fruit or anything that you can eat in the vehicle, of those little jobs are actually creating opportunities for people that do not have any other choice but to work on that. But those jobs are not great jobs, they're low quality jobs. If you look at it from a different perspective, you will see that, as I was saying, the driver is really at the heart of the system. So the driver is responsible for many things, and this is why it's difficult to really understand where to enter the system. The driver is the one you will have most difficulty having to speak to him. It's difficult to talk to them, and you will often in reform processes talk to owners or even unions before speaking to the driver. The driver is responsible for basically everything in the system, even involved in corruption, when in most cases, and in many cases, they will even encourage to pay the police because they don't have the necessary administrative documents to be running a system. So this scheme shows you the different roles a driver might have in the system, but you could have the same scheme for an owner or for a union, and you will see different like arrows pointing everywhere. I also recently went to a conference that spoke on this, on the paratransit role in the world in general. And according to UITP, so there's about 70% of public transport trips in the world, not only in the global south, but in the world, that use paratransit modes. So that's more than half of the trips in the world that depend on paratransit. That is because it does provide some advantages that are well known. The first one is flexibility. They're basically really flexible services. Then they're also demand responsive. If you have an unplanned area that appears in the city, the first public transport option to appear there is going to be paratransit. They're really active in that. They're really demand responsive. And then the other one, which is also often quoted, is that, well, they do not require a lot of investment from institutions or from the public side. They will invest on their own. So you don't need subsidies. You don't need anything else to make them run. But that comes with many problems too. The first one is an increase in congestion because the system is inefficient. I'll talk a bit about this later on, but basically a network of paratransit is just the layers and layers of individual decisions that are not thought as in a network type approach. So they're competing with each other, and in any case, they will always compete with each other. There's worsening road safety issues. Then there's also increasing CO2 levels because they use old vehicles, because they're always fighting. The driving behavior is not helping either. There's noise and local pollution happening too. And then there's something that is not often cited and that we don't really hear about it, but that we come up with and we see it in the system, is that harassment levels are quite high. And that is difficult to measure but it's an externality that is worth noting in the paratransit sector. All these examples actually tell us why we need to reform the paratransit sector. And what we decided to show in this case is 3 axes for reform. The first one is the network, because it's an inefficient network, because it results in long travel times, in reduced mean speeds. And you know that a mean speed is kind of the heart of the question if you want to be profitable in a public transport system. And then the second element will be operations, because they're basically poor quality services. In any way you want to define, it's often the case. And that they are often looked at as an obstacle to modernization in the public transport. And then the third and last element that we want to look at is the working conditions, which mean that what we were talking about just earlier, that these are really informal, low-level jobs, that they are creating disruptive competition in the systems, and that there's a lack of professionalization that is generalized across the different modes. And again, in that need for systemic reform of the paratransit sector is, I like this quote because it really highlights those 3 elements that I just showed you, which is the need to improve the quality of service, the need to articulate the overall transport offer with other existing offers, and evidently the precarious working conditions of the operator. So with those 3 elements, you might want to justify reform. Each city will look at each element in a different manner and might focus their justification for reform in one of those elements. But those 3 come hand in hand. It's difficult to separate them. Our intention now is to show you some elements and tools that can help in planning a reform of the paratransit sector. I really encourage you to read what is available from Mobilize Your City. There's 2 main documents that you can read. The first one is Understanding the Paratransit Sector, which is how to produce a diagnostic of the sector. And then the second one is the Paratransit Toolkit, which I will present later. I really encourage you to do it because I'm not going to be able to go into the details of everything here. So it's best if you look at it yourselves. It is not a one-size-fits-all approach. It just gives you elements that you can pick on and create your own reform. Each city with a different reform. The Paratransit Toolkit uses 4 steps, if I can say it that way. So the first one is preparing the reform, and it basically means know who's there, know who is responsible for that regulation and the planning of the paratransit sector, and define what you want to do with the sector, define what the vision is. So those 3 elements are key, and that is the first thing you need to do, is set out what you want to do with the sector. The second step, it really focuses on how to conduct reform. So the reforming the sector, it's quite explicitly stated in a way. I just want to stop and present 2 of them. The first one is the need for an adapted regulatory framework of the paratransit sector. In most cases, there is a regulatory framework, it's just not adapted or it's just not enforced in the city. So they are self-regulating in most cases. And the second one is evidently the definition of the access to the sector. So how can I become a paratransit operator myself, and what are the limits to that? And all of these tools, you can actually focus on one of them. You don't need to work on every one of them. You just want to select the ones that are most pertinent to your city. The third step is then supporting the reform, so that once you have decided what you want to do, you have decided how you want to do it. Now you have to decide with what do you want to do it. And the key here is the term professionalize, which focuses on accompanying the sector in building capacity. And it also is important to note the need for communication campaigns to explain what you're doing, to present to not only operators, but users to what you want to do. And then the fourth and final step is just, well, figure out what comes after. Ensure that the implementation takes place. Ensure that you can fund what you want to do, and really view and see how everything is evolving in the process. If you have that 4 steps and you select for each city what you want to do, it's likely that you might come up with different solutions. And the idea is that each city will develop its own reform. Now, that doesn't mean that every city has to have the same approach to reform. So there's one thing is the reform that you want to do, and then the second one is the approach that you might have with the paratransit sector. And you don't need to look at this as a three types of approaches to reform. It's more of a continuum between exclusion and inclusion of the paratransit sector. So you won't get boxed into one of the three categories. You might be in between one or two of them. So the first one, and I'm not going to go into the details of this, is just excluding paratransit, just taking it out of the system. That's your decision. Sometimes a legitimate one. It's often a political choice, and that's, if the city has decided that, that's the city's decision. The second one is replacing existing paratransit operators with new modes. So new formal modes that come into the system and change the outlook of the city. And then the last and more inclusive part is the inclusion of existing supply that actually sets out to set a role for each mode, depending on its advantages and what it can do to the system. If I go into the replacement, so two examples to explain what it means. The first one is, for instance, the introduction of BRT systems that can be used to be catalytic in reform. So once you introduce a new mode, you can think about how you organize other modes to make that BRT mode more efficient, or that tram mode more efficient, or that metro mode more efficient. And it often results in telling paratransit, well, you can actually take care of the last mile connectivity and be used in feeder services, but that's not the only solution. There's other solutions to each city. And then the second one is the fleet renewal programs. When you see that the paratransit has a bunch of modes, and you see, well, we could replace all these modes with one mode, and in a way homogenize, sorry, I cannot pronounce that word in English, homogenize, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing it correctly, vehicles, and set up, just say, well, this one type of vehicle should fit what the paratransit is doing. Then on the other scale is the inclusion part. And the inclusion is probably more difficult to implement because it takes longer, because it takes more negotiations to happen, and because it might not look like what you initially envisioned. And well, basically there's three rules to this. The first one is that you give each mode a role depending on its characteristics. If you're looking for flexibility, you might award paratransit a bigger role. If you're looking for reliability, yeah, maybe focus more on the institutional side of the supply. But you can mix the two of them. The second one is finding that right mix of vehicles. You don't have to have one single vehicle for paratransit. You can have many vehicles for paratransit, depending on what you want to do. And then the last one, and this is quite an important one, is the definition of a coherent regulatory framework. So adapted, that it takes into account what is really happening in the territory and not just setting out dreams of how it should be regulated. Now, this appears to be not concrete enough sometimes because we're talking about a general overview. And so what we intended, and I'm hoping that we achieved it, is that by presenting one example of how this was conducted in a city in Cameroon, in Yaoundé, you might be able to understand what this all entails and what this all means for your city. So I'll be presenting the case of Yaoundé in Cameroon, which is, I think it was mentioned by Redai yesterday in one of the roadmaps for paratransit reform. This is the result of the SUMP. So it's not the SUMP itself. The SUMP set out the reform and it was fleshed out detailed a bit later. In general, you can imagine the paratransit sector with two axes. So the first one is the capacity of the vehicle. And the second one is how flexible it is. Paratransit is low capacity, high flexibility, or low capacity, high flexibility modes. A BRT, for instance, or a metro, for instance, is a very high capacity, very rigid mode in the system. Well, in Yaoundé, there's three types of paratransit, and currently there's still no really structuring formal mode. There are the moto taxis, which are right at the end, very flexible, very low capacity modes that currently exist in the peripheral areas of the city because Yaoundé enacted a regulation that does not allow moto taxis in the CBD area. So you cannot enter the CBD with the motor taxi. Then you have taxi services, and this is complex because these are taxi services that can be used as on-demand or meter services. So they don't have a meter, but you can actually just hail a cab and tell them where to go. But the same vehicle in just 5 minutes later can be used as a shared mode, as a shared collective taxi. So you might have a case where you use the vehicle, the driver stops, and once he stops, he's looking for passengers. So he can go get 3 or 4 passengers, put them in the vehicle, and just go somewhere else. And there's nothing impeding anyone from doing that. So the system uses both approaches. And then you have minibuses that are a bit more regulated, but are limited to the peripheral area of the city. The idea of the SUMP was to introduce a structuring mode, in this case, a BRT system. So the question was, how do you organize what is there? Do you keep it? Do you take it off the system? Do you consider withdrawing it from the system? Well, how do you organize it to make it fit what you want to do with the mobility, with the public transport approach? So this is what it looks like, the reform looks like, and I'll show you the different element of this later on, is that you need to organize motor taxis in the peripheral areas. Currently, they are kind of assimilated to mafias. They are quite violent in some cases. When you go and talk to them, they don't want to be identified. They don't want to know who's there. So it's a very rough system in a way. So the idea is to organize them a bit and to award them a role in the system. Then for the taxis, the idea is really to make the clear difference between meter taxis, so the on-demand taxis, and shared taxis that should operate differently. And then the minibuses that could have a bigger role in the system as an in-between mode between that BRT and lower capacity services. So that was what was proposed for Yaoundé. But it was not proposed to go from one day to the next. This was like a whole progressive approach that required a lot of meetings and a lot of discussion with local stakeholders. Once you define a vision, and now you need to adapt it, and you need to adopt it. So you see the difference between adapting and adapting. First adapt, you talk to people, you see where something is not right or something they do not agree with. So then once you reach a consensual decision, you can adopt the vision, and then you can start thinking about other elements of the approach until you reach the contracting part of the service. And this is what it looks like. I'm hoping it's big enough, but in any case, I think you will find the presentation later on. But basically, it's based on 3 phases of the reform. The first one is just know who's there. And this is a really tough question in the case of Yaoundé, is they don't know how many motor taxis are there. They don't know how many taxis are there. They don't even know who the owner of the taxi is. And in most cases, it's suspected that the owner of the taxi is the regulator itself. So people working in the regulatory part of the system are actually owning the vehicle. So it's difficult to know who's there. But if you want to know who's there, you need to know who's asking the questions on who's there. And that's also a different problem in most African cities, is that you don't have an entity capable of doing so. So it required that first, like, underline and bold part of the reform, which is just reorganize your institutions, figure out who's doing what. The second part of the reform sought to actually consolidate operators and corporatize them. This also required different rounds of negotiation between, do we keep them as associations? Should we look at economic interest groups? Or ultimately what was decided, do we create cooperatives? So grouping of people to operate the system. Once you create the cooperatives, you can begin thinking about organizing contracting service. You can begin thinking about restructuring some infrastructure to award them a role in the system that is clear enough. And then the final one is the network restructuring, where you look at the network as a whole. And once you know and you have mapped the system, you reorganize, you consider the new BRT line, and you dispatch some other modes differently than what they are currently in the city. A quick side note on this is when I talk, and I know it, and I consciously do it in this case, is that I'm talking about the paratransit sector as a whole, but the reform was meant to be enacted mode by mode. So the reform for the paratransit, for the motor taxis, should not be the same as the one for the minibuses. Even if objectives are the same, it will take longer, I suspect, for the motor taxis than for the minibuses, and it will require different types of negotiations. So a mode by mode basis appears to be the best way to go. And why? I can come up with 4 explanations. The first one is that each mode has a distinct role in the system, so I'm going to negotiate differently. The second one is that there's different levels of professionalization. It's more difficult to professionalize a motor taxi than a minibus. The third one is that, well, in a multimodal system, each one will have a different role. And the third one is that I have different relationships with each one of them. When motor taxis are trying to hide from me, and that they won't necessarily want to talk to me, whereas collective taxis or minibuses, they are willing to talk to me. So the negotiations and the different type of relationships have a role to play in this type of reform. And finally, second side note is how do you contract operators? And Mobilize Your City also has a document on this, on how to contract with paratransit. So the idea is currently, if you're not in an open market with paratransit, you're using licenses, licenses that can either be quantitative or qualitative licenses. And the idea is to move from that to more structured type of agreements between the institutions and the operators that can be, for instance, concessions or franchises. Gross contracting will come a bit later because there's phases to go through before reaching gross cost contracting. And the idea is to move towards that end of the line. Just to finish up, this is really the last part of the presentation, is we wanted to show you 3 other cases of reform that have been somewhat successful in their objectives. And we wanted to show them by looking at the 3 axes. So the network, how did they move with the network? Did they change route or line definition? Who's working on subs? Who manages ranks? What is the service hours of the paratransit services? Then looking at operations, which basically means the quality of the services in terms of frequencies, how farebox is managed, the ticketing system, the vehicle quantity. Are you defining a vehicle depending on an area or line or a general system? All of this can be included, and vehicle specifications. And then what working conditions and what changed for different cities in terms of working conditions. These 3 cases are also published, and I really encourage you to read them. They're not necessarily published by MYC, but they're published by SSATP, and they're available online in English or in French, as far as I know. So the first one is one that's quite well known, which is the Dakar Fleet Renewal System. So you see those 2 vehicles on top of the right corner, the blue and red, yellow one, which is known as the car rapide, and which means the fast car in French, and the white one, which is a Nyangandiai. So those are 2 of the forms of paratransit that exist in Dakar before the reform. They still exist, but their numbers have really been reduced now. The reform actually sought to professionalize the system and to enact a fleet renewal program and to change all those vehicles into the one below, which is now known as a Tata or a F2 car. It depends on who you talk to. Basically, the diagnostic of the city was that it was a highly fragmented paratransit sector, and that low fares, because it's really cheap to take a bus in Dakar, actually did not allow owners to renew their fleet. So you would be traveling for the car rapides. Those are vehicles that can be even 40 years or even older than that in the city. So you still used those very, very old vehicles. So the idea was to renew that fleet. So what were the objectives? Just to finance that new paratransit fleet and to consolidate and professionalize that paratransit sector. So in terms of network, they did manage some type of route reorganization, They did create some routes for those new vehicles. Still out the jury's still out because there's still phases of ongoing reorganization of the network. But apparently it's a positive outcome. In terms of operations, yes, operators were really consolidated. So they created what they called the GE, which is an economic interest group. They created 13. And those people are now in charge of operating the system. So instead of talking to thousands and thousands of operators, of owners, now they have like 13 companies then they can discuss with. What is the not so good part of this is that when they attempted to introduce frequencies and define really fine details of the stops, they were not really able to. So frequencies are just, well, whenever they want to go, they go. There's not really defined frequencies. And working conditions was clear positive outcome in terms of they now provide drivers with a proper salary. They have health insurance and they have pensions that have been created by the system. And on top of that, they have a fund that allows them to participate in capacity building events. So that was quite a positive outcome. The second case is Cape Town's BRT system. So before the World Cup, it was decided that Cape Town would have a BRT for the World Cup. Cape Town has a BRT, but it was implemented after the World Cup. But I'm not going to go into that story. It's a long story. So the idea was that with BRT implementation, you could use that project to change the paratransit sector or to reform the paratransit sector. The diagnostic is basically similar to the one in Dakar, is that it was really disruptive competition from the paratransit towards institutional modes or formal modes, but also between themselves. The minibuses were fighting amongst each other in different streets of the city, and the willingness from the South African government to reform the sector. And this was in many documents. It was already stated that there needed to be a change, and the South African government had already started the fleet renewal, a national fleet renewal program, a bit less successful than the one in Dakar. So what were the objectives was to use BRT implementation to encourage the incumbent paratransit sector to go onto the BRT system and become operators of the BRT system and to professionalize them. In terms of output, so different to Dakar, this was just one corridor and not the entire city. So it focused on one corridor, the reform. In terms of what the network, yeah, it improved hierarchy of that corridor because it did create a backbone of the system with different services going into that backbone. In terms of operators, there was operator consolidation. Two VOCs were created. VOCs is vehicle operating companies, were created for Cape Town, and those are owned by the former paratransit operators on that corridor for the BRT. And working conditions, what is important to highlight there is the capacity building program, which was conducted by the institution or the formal bus company that proposed sessions with the University of Cape Town for paratransit operators so they could learn how to operate the system, how to operate buses. So the bus company was giving away its knowledge to the paratransit sector. What did not work so well was the loss of the paratransit role. This is a tricky one because when they first decided to implement the system, they promised, the city's government promised that there will be no job loss and that paratransit could operate the trunk system. And that was not the case. Jobs were lost, yes. And now the paratransit does not operate the trunk system, it operates feeder services in Cape Town. But that also paved the way for further reforms in the paratransit sector. And finally, Kigali's systemic reform, which is a whole different element. This is a whole different case. I don't know if you know the context, but Rwanda has, it's easier to enact changes in Rwanda because of the context of the political context than in other places. So it's a different thing, but the idea remains the same, is that Kigali had a system that was dominated by the paratransit sector. It was disorganized and you could see the vehicle size physically being reduced from minibuses to motor taxis that began really plying the streets and being everywhere. And on top of that, there was an interest from private bus companies to become operators in urban areas. They were operating interurban trips, but now they wanted to become urban operators. So basically, they reorganized the city using what they call zone-based contracts. And so those are the 3 zones. They define 3 zones. It's not really precise to call them zones. It's just a bunch of lines that were grouped together, and then they were concessioned to different companies. But it's not really zones. It's just mostly groups of lines. And so the new bus companies that came into the city, each one got one of those zone-based contracts or concessions, and the paratransit sector got the 3rd one, which is the biggest one. So the paratransit grouped together, created an operating company and bid for that 3rd one, and they got it. What outcomes of the case we can name? So the network, there was some optimization because of the route type of approach, but it remained what they call latent demand. Latent demand is that the paratransit and the private bus vehicles are not able to serve all demand in the system. So motor taxis do still play a big role in it, especially during peak hours, where you can see motor taxis competing with minibuses on the road. Operators were consolidated. It was sort of easier than in other cases, so I'm not going to go into the detail of that. And the working conditions were also improved because now they work with a contract. The capacity building and the type of knowledge transfer from one to the other was not as important in Kigali as it was in Cape Town or in Dakar. Sorry, yes. So just to finish up on this, one of the questions that we often come and face is that, is it really important to include paratransit in an SUMP, and what could be the role for paratransit in an SUMP? So yeah, there's definitely a role in the paratransit in the SUMP for paratransit, and I'm probably going to answer it by looking at it a bit differently. Is that if in the global south you have cities that are still built and are still growing with unplanned areas, I think it's not logical to expect the city to have only formal modes to serve those areas. If you want to provide opportunities and access to jobs and services, I think there's a mix that can occur between the formal system and the paratransit system if they work intelligently together. So that is using the paratransit system's advantages, basically flexibility and demand responsiveness, and organizing them in a way as to fit what you want as a vision for the public transport system, and do so progressively and not just run into a wall by defining very strict measures. And that's when I have 15 seconds left. So very good. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Pablo. Actually, I want to raise something. In Jakarta, we don't have paratransit anymore. The minibuses, the angkot, it's already integrated into the BRT system. Yeah, so I can maybe I can summarize a bit your presentations. Union, which is usually represent interests of the stakeholders, they cannot involved in the operation system in the future, in the new system. And then in the paratransit system, there are complex stakeholders. There's a lot of layering. And then surprisingly, 70% of public transport trips in the world use paratransit mode still. And how to reform paratransit, there is 2 things that we have to do: network, improve the network, and then operations and also working conditions. And lesson learned is first is we have to knowing who is the stakeholder, map all of the stakeholder, know how to conduct the reform, and then supporting the reform itself, building the capacity, and ensuring that there's going to be implementation, financing that we want to discuss later. And then approach, whether we're going to exclude them into our new system or replace them or we want to include them in the new system. And I agree with you as well, working on it mode separately. Again, study case from Jakarta, we have a lot of a system before the BRT. There's a big bus, 12-meter bus, and then 9-meter bus, and angkot, which is 14-meter buses. So there is a step, a phase on the integration with the BRT system. So we work separately to incorporate that into the new system. And then contract with Paratransit, there's a lot of type of contract. Usually in the new system, we'll introduce gross cost contract, which the operator will pay based on their performance, which is pay per kilometers. And that's also a challenge as well, because there's need a transition. For example, usually the bus driver, they will get the money every day, but with this new system, so they will get the money like every month. So there's going to be a transition on there as well, and lesson learned from Dhaka, Cape Town, and Kigali. Yeah, without further ado, again, I'll invite Imran Khan to share lesson learned on the bus restructurizations, case study for the implementation of BRT system in Peshawar.
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Muhammad Imran Khan, and I'm GM Operations at Trans Peshawar, which is an organization responsible for operation and maintenance of Peshawar BRT system. Construction of Peshawar BRT system started in 2017, and it's in operation since 2020. During this project, we also have one component, which is bus industry restructuring program. And this actually deals that how we should include paratransit system in while you are building a new BRT system or doing some reform. So in the following slide, we will discuss this further. Contents, there we will discuss three topics. The first is introduction about the city. Maybe you people have knowledge about the Peshawar city, but we will discuss a little. Then the context in which we started this bus reform projects, and then we'll give a brief overview of Peshawar BRT system, what are the key features and how it has a performance. And then we will discuss paratransit reforms in Peshawar BRT, how we did it. So introduction, the city is 49 kilometers from Afghan border. And the reason this location is important that in Afghan war 2020, actually 2000 more than 400 refugees migrated to Pakistan. So it put additional pressure on the infrastructure that needs to be considered. The city population is approximately 2.3 million. Actually, the district population is approximately 5 million, but the city population is 2.3 million. Density is approximately 1,600 people per square kilometer, but in the part of the city, in the center of the city, it's almost double, which is approximately 3,000 passenger populations per square kilometer. As Pablo explained, that they don't have knowledge of Asian context in African, but what I listen actually the problems and the advantages and the disadvantages between African cities and Asian cities are almost the same. So the key challenges that we have faced that to integrate the paratransit and the new BRT system. So though the paratransit services were providing services on the main corridor, but still 70% of the population were unserved, then there were little to none regulations, like the fare were to be notified by the government, but the operator used to charge the fare at their own convenience according to the time of the day and according to weather. So there was very less regulatory control. Then the system was completely excluded for vulnerable segment of the society, like for the females, for persons with disabilities, and all these problems were associated with the paratransit that were operating in the city. The systems were unsafe for, especially in the peak hours, the people used to travel on roof of the buses because the paratransits were unable to meet the passenger demand, especially in peak hours. And the results were like congestions on the road because people used to take rickshaws or cars or motorcycles. So all roads were like congested, especially in peak hours. So key objectives were to have in the new system, the main purpose was to have competition for the market and not a competition with the market, is in the case of paratransit, where the paratransit vehicles, they compete for the passenger. So the purpose was to transport for all, including the vulnerable segment of the society, and then educating the people for a new system which will utilize the technology, and then leaving no one behind, integrating the paratransit system, their employees and the owners and the new system, so they should not remain a threat for the system. And then for the last mile connectivity, we have planned bicycle sharing systems, which was clubbed with the BRT system. So now a brief overview of Peshawar BRT system. So actually, from the start, we take a holistic approach for the planning of the BRT system. So from the day first, we think of aiming of gold standard BRT, that the new system shall have the features which accordingly, when we evaluated, we achieve the gold standard BRT. Then knowing the factor that currently the transport department does not have the capacity to reform the sectors and operate the commercial operation. So what we did, two new organizations were established with the name of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa Urban Mobility Authority and Trans Peshawar. Similarly, bus industry restructuring program or inclusion of paratransit were made part of the system, and part of the finances were allocated to this bus industry restructuring program, or what we call paratransit reforms. Then integration was planned in advance between bicycle sharing system and paratransit system, bicycle sharing systems, and the non-motorized traffic transit with the BRT system. Then marketing and awareness strategies were planned from the very start, that the new the stakeholders are informed what are in the new system and how we should accommodate the paratransit operators. Because if you are lacking this marketing and awareness, then it will create a problems for you, because rumors spread faster than reality. So it is very important that you have a strategy how to spread information within the stakeholders. Then stakeholders were identified: the person with disabilities, the women organizations, the paratransit operators, the students. All these were included, and their feedback in the new system were taken. Then contracting model are very important, that when you are doing paratransit reforms, then how you will accommodate the employees which are already working in the paratransit sector. So if you are going to operate the system through private sector, then how you have to create a linkage between the paratransit operators which are previously operating this the vehicle and in the new system. And then gender action plan was made part of the overall approach, that how the vulnerable segment of the society can be accommodated in the new system. So the key features of the BRT system is a 27 kilometer from north to south. Then we have 30 BRT stations, which are spaced approximately 800 meters. Then 244 hybrid buses, diesel electric buses. And this 3 depots, the concept for these, actually there are 2 depots, and then have a park and ride and commercial spaces. The purpose of this 3 commercial plaza was to accommodate commercial activities, and this so to cross subsidize the bus operations. And then we have 17 routes which are like a combination of type of services: the express routes, the direct services, and the feeder services. So it make a whole network for the city. Then bicycle sharing system, for the first time in Pakistan, it runs very successfully. Especially it is like planned in 2 parts of the city. One is university campus where there are students, so it's very popular among the students. This is a whole network. You can see the the dense corridor, which is basically a BRT corridor, and it is integrated with direct services, all to maximize the ridership and have profitability for the systems. Global recognition of the system, BRT standard, the Peshawar BRT was evaluated by the BRT Standard Technical Committee, and we achieved 97 points out of 100, which term is a gold standard BRT, and this is the marks that we are highest in the world that is currently with Peshawar BRT system. In 2022, we were the honorable mention by the Sustainable Transport Award. In 2024, for the next year, we are again honorable mention for the 2024 Sustainable Transport Award. Transport Ticketing Global also awarded Best Smart Ticketing Award because the fare between bicycle sharing system and the bus system is integrated. Then we have availability of information of paratransits, the bus, the feeder services, direct services, BRT system, and bicycling, the scheduling information, the arrival of buses. So because of these features, we won the Transport Ticketing Global Award. And then this year in February, we won the World Resource Prize for City Award with $25,000 because of the feature services it offered to the city during COVID pandemics. So this is the implementation mechanism. Asian Development Bank financed the project with co-financing of AFD, and then part of the funds was from government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. It was not only Asian Development Bank and AFD, they provided funds for the project, but they also provided technical assistance to the projects. And thanks to Lloyd Wright and David, who works very closely with us, and we faced so many challenges, but at the end of the day, we were successful because like the BRT system is termed as gold standard BRT, and nowadays we are carrying more than 320,000 passengers per day. So this all because of the assistance from Lloyd and their expertise and all these things. Then we have Transport and Mass Transit Department, which is actually the lending department. A loan is lended to Transport and Mass Transit Department. Then Khyber Pakhtunkhwa Urban Mobility is the executing agency for this project. Then there were further two organizations, Peshawar Development Authority, which were responsible for the construction of civil works, and Trans Peshawar, which I am representing, was responsible for the operational design, procurement of buses, ITS system, and then operation and maintenance of the system. So this is the achievements that previously the employment ratio in the paratransit sector or the prior to BRT system was just 0%. And now it increased to 12%. Then the ridership previously in the paratransit buses were 2 seats were allocated in Ford wagon and 5 seats were allocated for female in rocket buses. So now we are carrying more than 26%, and to recent statistics, even it is touching 30%. So the female ridership is increasing because of this BRT system. And now our system is also accessible to 5,000 persons with disabilities. And you can see from the graph that the ridership in 2020 was 1.6 million. Now we have achieved 8 million of ridership per month. So this automatically speaks about the success of the system. So now we have equitable public transport system, universal, accessible, and increased mobility. Now we will discuss a little bit in detail about the paratransit reforms, how we did it in case of Peshawar, and what challenges and one lesson we have learned in Peshawar. So these are the type of vehicles that were operating before BRT system: mini buses, rocket buses, Ford wagons, and then rickshaws, and then some other vehicles which we called Suzuki vans. So these were the paratransit services which were operating before BRT system. And from the pictures, you can see the previous buses and the new buses. These are completely like transformations from a very low quality buses to a very high quality of buses. And that's why the ridership increased many times because of the BRT system. So the fare for these vehicles were basically partially regulated by the government. Is already told that basically the fare was to be notified by Transport Department, but it was not to be followed by this paratransit vehicle because of the many risks and issues associated with them. Then these vehicles, some of these vehicles were providing point-to-point services for specific period of the day, and some of them were operating with fixed paratransits. the problems associated with these paratransit were the same that were already explained by Pablo, that they used to provide services on the trunk corridor on the peak station, but they used to avoid the low density areas, the residential area. Similarly, they have created congestion on peak bus stops where they are fighting or they are struggling for to maximize the passenger revenue. So they ultimately created congestions on the roads, and they created safety issues and a lot of more problems that already explained. So the purpose of a bus industry restructuring program was to have ensure a smooth transitions from these services to a modern public transport system. The contracts of Peshawar is a little bit different. It's main corridor. There are one main corridor. So if we remove these from just totally exclude them from the system, it's very difficult to handle these people, because they will remain a continuous threat for the new system through strikes, through running parallel with the service. So it was the purpose to initially from the day first, it was made part of the plan that we have to deal these people in a way that we have a smooth transition for the new system. So we did identification of all stakeholders there who will be affected from the new BRT system. So we did identifications. Then we did profiling of the existing industries, and the profiling include vehicles, what type of vehicles are operating the system, what is their age, and what is their cost and revenue. And then we did a profiling of the employees and the owner who are working in the system, about their education, about their earning, about their working hours, and all these things. And then we prepared on economic compensation model and inclusion, that how we should include the owners in the system, how we should include or compensate operators, how we should compensate the employees to have a better opportunities for them as compared to pre-BRT system. So what we did a detailed bus industry restructuring surveys, and broadly classified, we did route and bus profiling. So in route and bus profiling, when we have initial plan for the new BRT system, so we identified which routes to be curtailed and which routes to be removed. Then at the same time, we did the profiling for the vehicles, their age, their operating costs, their fuel types, and their trips per day. Similarly, assessment of their daily revenues and daily cost. So as Pablo told, that these are the systems that were sustaining their operation on daily revenue basis. So it was not possible for them, like they have so much profits that they can sustain in operations without revenue for a month or even for days. So this is the same, these systems almost have the same characteristics all over the world. And then checking vehicle suitability for inclusion. Actually, in the bus industry restructuring program, we included 3 types of vehicles, which is a Ford wagons, rocket buses, and mini buses. There was some other paratransit also, like Suzuki, we called it Suzuki vans, small vans, and then rickshaws. These were also paratransit. But initially we included, so from this industry restructuring program, we concluded that we need to include these 3 types of vehicle in our bus industry restructuring program. Then we did employees and owner profiling. And the purpose of this owner and employees profiling was that how we should accommodate in the new system. So we should know about their educations, their experiences, and their potential interest in their new system, that in what role they want to work with us, and also to assess that what type of training they will be required to accommodate in the new system. So based on the survey results, we had 517 3 type of vehicles: bus rockets, then mini buses, and Ford wagons. Then out of these 517, 397 were actually the owners of these 517 vehicles. And these people, sometime of the operations or during the last like 20 years, they were also the drivers at the same time. So over the time, they earn so much that they buy the vehicles from the other drivers, and they are now the owners. Similarly, 126 who were the owners, and at the same time, they were the drivers also. And then in the overall system, there were 517 drivers and 510 fare collectors. What we actually did that we estimated that in the new BRT system, how much employee we will require. We estimated the number of drivers, the janitorial staff that will be working in the system, the security staff that will be working in the system, and other mechanics and all these stuff. So we estimated that we will need more than 4,000 employees in the new system. So from the survey result, we also estimated that how many employees are working currently in the existing industry. So we find out that it is 1,300. So what we did that in the vehicle operating contracts, VOC contract, and the system control service provider contracts, we made it mandatory for them to have employment opportunity programs. And it was the responsibility that within a period of 3 years, they should accommodate 30% of the staff from these existing industries. So when we make them it mandatory that they should accommodate 30% from the existing industry, then automatically those who are working in the existing will be automatically accommodated in the new system. Yes, there were some challenges, like the people who were working in the existing industry, they did not have the requisite knowledge. So what we did, we make it mandatory for the service provider also to provide the requisite training. When we did this profiling, then we have a detailed qualification, experience, and the interest of the employees that in which sector they want to work. So accordingly, we plan it in our vehicle operating contracts and system control good contracts that they should accommodate these things. And then we have also included that they should provide 8 working hours in salary according to the labor law and the minimum insurances that is required for in accordance with the applicable laws. So the process for inclusion of owners, how we included them in the system. So we have, based on the survey result and the compensation mechanism, we have some eligibility criteria that initially we did a survey that which vehicles are operating in the city. So the first condition was like that if they have, they are included in the survey, said they are eligible. Similarly, if they have a route permit, then they are eligible for the system. Then we did enlistment process, and we advertised it in the newspaper, on the electronic media, and we visited the union people that we are going to have this system, and those who are willing to include in this program, then they show their interest through formal submission of applications. And then the information to be required was like personal information, registration book, purchase, original prices, original route permits, and consent of the owner. And we gave actually 2 options to the owners. The owners, the option was that like we will based on the assessment, there was a compensation model, a statistical model was prepared that this will be the maximum price that we will give it to the vehicle owner. And at the same time, we also agreed with them that we will give you a 12 months compensation, business loss compensation to the owners also. And all these were agreed during the negotiation process, which took almost more than a year. So we discussed all these processes, and then we advertised, and based on that, we received a document. So these were 2 options, that if you do not agree with this option, then you have to take some alternate rule, and you have not to operate the vehicles on the roads where we will be operating a new BRT system. So this is the mechanism that how we get the vehicles from them. So we have a scrutiny and physical verification committee. It was notified by the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa Urban Mobility Authority, which is a regulating agency for this. So they have members from the different departments, from the registration, from excise and taxation, from the transport departments, from the vehicle examination sections, and from the police department to verify the documents. Then at the same time, Trans-Peshawar advertised and hired a company for scraping of vehicles. So Trans-Peshawar assisted this SPV committee, scrutiny and physical verification committee, for the verification and approval of the inclusion or purchase of existing vehicle. So we when the SPV committee approved it, then they authorized the payments for the owner, and at the same time hand over the vehicle to a scraping company. So this is the whole process which we run it continuously for the scraping procedure. This was the pricing policy or compensation mechanism that based on statistical model, we fixed a maximum price for the rocket buses is 1.1 million Pakistani rupees. And for the Ford wagon, it was 1.5 million, but it was not like that we have to pay across same all. So it was divided in 3 categories, basically based on documentation, manufacturing, year of the vehicle, and then route permits, and then some physical verification by the committee. So based on that factor, we have to calculate payment price. And on top of that, 12 months compensation, business loss compensation. So communication with bus operators is very important. More than 45 routes were operating in the city. So if you do not communicate with them, then it is a problem for the even for the new project. Majority of the paratransit routes which operating pre-BRT was actually overlapping. So have the same issues, sustainability and safety issues and congestion issue. So most of the routes that were plying on this proposed BRT corridor. So if you do not effectively communicate, then it is a routine problem that you will face strikes or resistance. So one should do effective communication with these transit operators to avoid any delay in the projects. And then operators were engaged through workshop, physical surveys, paratransit, and one-to-one communication. Discussion and negotiation takes like 12 to 18 months. And then on top of that, the scrapping time also takes almost 1 year. So it runs for almost three years. And then 1,600 sessions were done with the reason that most of the owners were actually individual operators. So it took a lot of time. Then with the communication with the line departments, some 43 sessions were conducted with the line departments. And then multiple groups were formed to have negotiation, discussion, and shared information with these paratransit operators. And leader of the transport operators or unions were kept fully engaged in the process. And in case of Peshawar, it is very critical because they are like very hostile. If you do not engage them, then it creates a lot of problems. So social impacts, leaving no one behind. The objective was to include employees and operator as a part of the new projects. Reform process, actually we offered, we have like a capacity of 4,000 employment. So the 1,300 existing, they were provided the opportunity to be part of the system. Then the reform process actually offered a better jobs for the employees. Before the BRT system, it was very hard for them to, like, they used to work for more than 10 hours. So now they are working with us maximum 8 hours. They don't have off days in a week. Now they have off days. They were not paid according to minimum wage in accordance to the applicable laws. Now they are getting all those benefits. So for them, it's for the employees, it's like now a heaven, like their job skills, they are improved. We provided them a training. So this reform process have a very positive impacts on the lives of the people who were working previously in the system. So the reform process offered jobs to the vulnerable segment of the society, especially special persons and females. Previously, they were excluded all from this system. So this is like we left no one behind and included everyone in this reform process. So this is a pictorial overview of the system. We did engagements, then we did profiling of the employees and the vehicles, then we did enlistment, then the scrutiny and physical verification committee verified all these information. Then we made payments to the owners, and then we scrapped the vehicle. And while scrapping the vehicle, we installed a CCTV system to make sure that all vehicles that are received by the scrapping companies are scrapped in accordance with the criteria that were defined in the contract. So challenges, actually individual, there were so many individual operators, 517. So from the figures, we took it like more than 1,600 sessions to talk with them and give them the information about the new system, and also at the same time to tell them what are for the new and what are for them in the new projects. Vehicles operating on the routes, they have registrations from some other part of the city, from of the country also. So it took a lot of time also to have verified those documents. Then in the past, since last 20 years, there are multiple attempts to reform the bus process, and every time it did not work. So this time the these owners have the trust deficit that they think it's the same process the government is doing since 20 years. To make them convinced that no, this time this is a different scenario, it took a lot of time, and it was a challenge. And then multiple organization, environment, transport department, vehicle examination, the police department. So it's like a challenge for us. And then identification of engagement mode. It's very important because most of them are illiterate. They have language barriers. They have like they have the different characteristics. So you have to identify that which mode is suitable for which type operator to, and which way we have to talk with them. So this was like a big challenge, and it cannot be done simply with the one person. So we have then multiple groups for them, and then registered owners in many cases were like in the with the excise and taxation department. The owner was like person A, but in actually the person who did enlistment was person B. So the verification was a big challenge, and it took a lot of times. Then the route permits were banned before operations, before planning of this project. So it was also very difficult to identify the real owners, or identify that either this vehicle was operating in the city before BRT or not. So it was like a big challenge. And then vehicles from other cities started to fly when they learned about that this is a good compensation. Then other vehicles from other city also fly, and they are operated on the road, so that they be entitled for the compensation. So lesson learned is already explained that you need to maintain a list of paratransit vehicle operating in the city before start of the BRT system. Otherwise, it will be a big challenge, and many vehicles will come to the city, and they will say we need to be included in the system. Old vehicles shall be removed from the system gradually. If you remove it once, then it will create a vacuum. Then the rumor spreads faster than reality. So effective communication strategy is very important. Then include training and employment opportunity as mandatory requirements in new operating contracts if you are operating the system through private sectors. Then in advance, we need to decide about scraping methodology. In our case, we did not define it for a scraping company. So when they scrape the vehicle manually, it took a lot of time. So if before BRT, you need to estimate the number of vehicles that to be scraped. So if the number of vehicles are too much, and you need a shorter time for scraping of vehicle, then you need to make it mandatory that they should have a scraping plant, so that quickly scrape the vehicles. Then make it in mandatory to in contract to keep a video record of scraping of vehicles. An operator may be given opportunity to other modes of transport also. For example, we did not include rickshaws, and we did not Suzuki vans in this process, because we were planning for limited part of the city. If we remove it completely, then there will be a vacuum in the city for other part of. So what we did, we offered them the alternate routes, the rest part of the city where BRT is not operating. So we then give them opportunity that you can operate over here. But still, in the reform process, I think they may also be given some other opportunities like bicycles or rickshaws or something like that. So this is a lesson learned from, or because with the success of this reform process, the rickshaws people especially, they approached us too much that we also need to be accommodated with the way we did with the buses, the Ford wagons and the rocket buses. So that need to be included, that instead of actual compensation, maybe some of them are give alternate vehicles also. Inclusion of paratransit and bus reforms are the key to success, if especially when the city has limited road. Like in case of Lahore, we also did it, but the city was very big city. So in that case, we offered them alternate routes that, okay, you can operate your vehicles in this part of the city. But in case of Peshawar, if you have limited opportunity, then you need to include these people. Otherwise, they will go on protest. In such big projects, they cannot tolerate delay in the project. So it's for smooth transition. It requires that these people to be included properly in the new system. So this is the final product. Like we have, have seen the rocket buses, the old buses. Now it's replaced with clean vehicle technology buses, hybrid buses, 244 vehicles, and it's universally accessible buses. So with ITS technologies, then we have with physical integrations of paratransit services with BRT corridor. So maximize the ridership and it increase the convenience for the passengers. And then again, with integrations between the paratransit and the BRT system, now we have mobile app, we have a smart card system. So the fare are integrated between these lines, information are integrated. You can get all information about your travel in the same card. So with the process, with the smooth transition, you will get a product which is best suited for the city. And just to conclude that in this whole process, we did not get any complaints that someone, like we did 2 complaints, but actually those complaints were not about the process. Actually, it was a dispute between the owner about the ownership of the vehicle. So it was a smooth transition which works very successful. In the case of Peshawar, yes, there are some improvements. Like we did not accommodated rickshaws, which were, and the reason was that there were more than 85,000 rickshaws. So it's very difficult to do a profiling for them and to accommodate, because most of these rickshaws did not have a route permit or licensing in case of Peshawar. So it's very difficult to include them, but we need to find a way how we should accommodate these rickshaws, because most of the rickshaws in case of Peshawar are diesel operated. So with replacement of these rickshaws with the e-scooters or the e-rickshaws or these things can be like a good journey for the low and just and low carbon transitions. So this is all about my presentations. I hope I explain it in a very like a simple way so that people can understand how we did it in case of Peshawar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Imran. So we learned from Peshawar BRT about the objective of the system. The new system is transport for all, and also seamless journey with the integration with the bike sharing system. And then what we learn is communication and awareness with all of the stakeholder, because paratransit usually they operate only on the high demand passengers. And the program that they introduce is identification of all stakeholder, and then profiling of existing industry, and how to do economic compensations model, and also inclusions, and also bus industry restructuring survey. They also do that. They do route or bus profiling, and then also employees and owner profiling, and how they could include the existing operator in the new system in the future. And the other thing is the inclusions of the existing stakeholder, and also provide training for them on the new system. And they also introduced the eligibility criteria for who's the stakeholder that can be included in the new system. And also they have a scrapping program and procedure and compensation mechanisms, and communication and stakeholder consultations and engagement is the key. Even for this process, they need 80 months. Maybe the construction is less than that, maybe 1 to 2 years. And ensuring that no one left behind in the new system. And also there's a challenges as well, which is a fragmented system, fragmented operators, a government sector, and also route permit. Yeah, and a lesson learned that Imran already discussed previously. And yeah, this is the 2 presentation from our 2 presenters. Come back for the discussion session. I hope that after tea break, you will return refreshed. I'll also want to invite all of the discussion to join me here on the stage. Pablo, Imran, Patricia, Suji, Elizabeth, and Reda. So yeah, we have 6 discussion here, but first I will start with Pablo. From your presentation, so we've seen that several reformations method for paratransit. Yeah, in mostly in Africa and America. And then from the previous option discussed, what are the main consideration in deciding which approach, which method to use? And in your opinion, what should decision maker in Asian city pay the most attention to?
So thank you for that question, because it can allow me to say a couple of things that I could not say during the presentation, and that in answering that question. So to me, there's what do Asian cities need to do? They need to come up with a reform of the paratransit sector for that city. They should not copy anyone else. What they need to do is figure out first what they want to do, and then draw a map or a roadmap towards that objective, and not copy anyone. Learn from mistakes, learn from what everyone else did and that went well, but never copy something that is not from your city and try to implement it. So that kind of answers your first question. And what do Asian decision makers need to focus on? So again, I'm not an expert on Asian cities. I'm far from it. I think there's a wide range of cities in terms of what they need to do. I don't think cities in the Caucasus have to do the same thing as the cities in Southeast Asia. I think these are different systems. But I would definitely suggest, as I would suggest to anyone, to look at progressivity. So not focus on immediate impact, but on long-term approaches to reform, and also on the need to communicate with the paratransit sector and explain why is it that reform is being envisioned, and why is it what are the objectives of this reform, and explain that there's going to be also winners and losers, but the idea is that everyone can not lose too much in the process.
Yeah, so there is no one method that can be applicable for all like other cities, and then we need to focus on the progress. Also, the stakeholder engagement is yeah, and moving to Peshawar. So when the BRT is there implemented, there's still a competition with paratransit currently, and then how you deal with it. That's the first. Second, also how long does it take for an industrial transition, like in your presentation, and which critical time should we pay attention when we want to introduce new system and then scrap the old system? For example, the time when the old system should stop and the new like BRT system should start, and how long you manage the transition based on your case, because it will have an impact on the bus industry and also the passenger. They will confuse, okay, this is the new system available. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, in the case of Peshawar BRT system, first, like initially is already explained in the presentation that it is not advisable to remove all the vehicle at the same time. You need to remove it gradually, and that what we did that in 2020 when we started the BRT operations, then almost for a year the paratransit were operating parallel to the BRT system. It was not 100%. It was reduced with the passage of time. When we started the scrapping process and or collection of vehicles in 2019, then by 2020 we have 50% of vehicles scrapped, but still 50% were remaining. So what actually we did that when we started operations in BRT system, then we had 17 routes. So we did not start all direct services or feeder services with the main corridor BRT. We gradually started. We first operated main BRT corridor. Then after 1 month, we started adding feeder routes or direct services to the BRT system. So when you add gradually these BRT services, then you need to remove gradually these paratransits from the system, or you take these buses collection gradually. The reason for this is, like, if you want to operate all route at the same time, then every new system has so many challenges. It will be very difficult for the organization to handle the bus operations and to deal with the paratransit. So you need to first operate the BRT system, and then the routes which are totally operating on parallel to the corridor, you need to first remove it. Then when you add the feeder services or direct services to your BRT system gradually, then you need to remove those vehicles from the system. So it is all a gradual process. And directly if you remove it, then it will create a vacuum, because the passenger would demand, okay, you have removed the paratransit services, now we need BRT system. So if it is not at that location, then it will create a public unrest and complaints. So we need to remove it gradually in the system. Like the paratransit that continued for like a year, not with 100% vehicle, but gradually it was reduced like this. Then this overall transition, like the negotiation took 12 months to 18 months. The critical time, you have a specific question about the critical time. The critical time for this, when you started the construction. When you start construction, it affects the corridor. It affects their businesses. So at that moment, they start thinking that what is for us in this new project and what we will do. Because when you started the construction, then the congestion issues on the corridor started because of the construction. So they also lose the ridership. People take alternate ways in alternate modes. So they started, the worry started. This is the critical time. And this continues until you pay them. So, and now it depends on your construction phase. This depends on your operation phase. If the construction phase is longer, the compensation phase is longer, then for this whole duration, you have to keep them engaged in this process. Otherwise, by the moment they feel that, okay, nobody is contacting us and we don't have clarity, then they think that this is the critical time to protest through unions or individually to get their demands. So this is like to answer specifically, from construction till the payments. This is all the critical time in which you have to engage these paratransit services and their operators and employees.
So the longer you like the contract, or you pay the compensation to the old stakeholder.
No, actually, a compensation was like initially it was during negotiation. It was discussed that the project will take like 1 year. It is a negotiable. If, for example, your construction take 2 years, then you can by which time you want to take the vehicle. If from the construction you want from them that within 1 year we will take the vehicle, then it is a 1 year compensation. If you want to take 2 years, then it's the time that you need to compensate them for this duration. But in case of Peshawar, we compensated it for 1 year.
Okay, thank you. So move to Philippines now. So to Patricia first, yeah. Patricia, you follow the elaboration process on the reform of paratransit jeepneys in Philippines. What were the main steps to prepare this paratransit reform? And then we want to also understand what is the operator's main concern based on your observations, and what is the GIZ role here?
Okay, thank you for the question. So GIZ has been involved with the PUV modernization or the public utility vehicle modernization since its inception, I think as early as 2014. And so it's been like 9 years in the making. The first few years were actually a lot of studies and stakeholder consultations, but at some point it got to this point essentially where government was like, we have studied enough, let's implement this. And so in 2017, they released the department order, basically referred to as the Omnibus Franchising Guidelines, which lays out the plan for this PUV modernization. And I say PUV modernization, not just jeepney modernization, because it actually did look at getting towards buses and other public transport modes in the future. So this PUV modernization program, as envisioned by government, had 10 components, which includes actually all of the things I think that we heard earlier. The importance of regulatory reform, the importance of reviewing the routes, modernizing the vehicles, financing, involving stakeholders, and offering stakeholders a way to either build the skills necessary to stay in the program or to shift out of the program. Communication was also one of the 10 components, and there's also scrapping, which they had nicely called vehicle useful life program because of the negative connotations of scrapping. And I think I missed a couple, but in general, it was a very well thought out and well laid out program. But as we know, implementation, of course, can be very different. And I think what I'm hearing now is one of the issues or one of the main differences is that the PUV modernization program was implemented on a national scale. There was no idea of doing it as we're hearing from everywhere on a per city basis. And it sounds like from Peshawar's example, like even one city will take 1.5 years of consultation, tens of hundreds of meetings and all of this negotiations with all the stakeholders. And doing that on a national scale, of course, just did not give us time to any of us, either GIZ or DOTR or any of the other multilaterals involved in this program. Like no one had the time to focus all of that energy on the program. And so implementation, had a lot of issues. One of the biggest issues that we hear to this day is the financing aspect. So before in 2017, 2018, when the program was launched, subsidizing road-based public transport in the Philippines, I would say, was unheard of. Like the Philippine government was happy to subsidize airports, happy to subsidize the construction of the roads, happy to subsidize the rail system. But the moment you talked about giving subsidy to a jeepney driver or to a bus driver, they suddenly became very like, yeah, that's never gonna fly. And so that is why the initial financing scheme that we had was very small. It was just a 5% equity from government, and the rest would have to be on loan from a government financial institute, and they would have 6% interest, 7 years to pay. And that's too much investment for a single jeepney driver who is, as noted earlier, these people are used to getting earnings one day and then spending it or paying it off already to whoever owns the vehicles. So that whole system was changing and there was not enough financial subsidy. So I think just today there's more news that there are still some transport groups who are opposing the program because they're not getting enough financial support, even if since the pandemic, government has more than doubled the financial support already. So it's still reaching only about maybe 10% of a vehicle cost. And that's really one of the main concerns. And so this also translates to issues of just transition of workers losing their jobs because they literally cannot afford to stay in the business. And yeah, I think that would be the main concerns. And as GI said, we've been, well, we obviously again started with the policy program in 2014. In 2018, we also did an early evaluation where there were only like, I think, a handful of routes all over the country. And the findings then were that the routes where there were operators who were already like, dedicated transport operators and who knew how to handle a business, they were doing great. They were like raking in the money and they were growing their fleet. Their only limitation then was the actual vehicles available because the manufacturing side hadn't caught up. But the routes where there were cooperatives who were, very small time, or people who had invested in the jeepneys but were actually working somewhere else, these routes were not making money and were instead really facing a lot of issues, like what was mentioned earlier as well, that there, or what you asked earlier, that there was conflict on the same route as those who hadn't modernized yet. So yeah, we're monitoring all of that, and we do have an upcoming project that wants to help try address that from the financial perspective, especially, and seeing how we can support the banks and how we can support the transport workers to access the loans and to pay them back as well.
I think still in Philippine case. So Suji, moving to Davao, how this national PUV modernizations guideline or toolkit implement in Davao, and then in the case of Davao and the reorganization of Paratransit operator, the project introduced the SDP, Social Development Program, to address the impact on the current stakeholder, including jeepney and others, which is driver. Can you explain more about the program?
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, the colleague from the Davao City is there, so I'm really feel awkward to speak on behalf of them. But actually, I was involved in the project from 2017, so I know the history. So let me allow to explain about the project. So as Patricia mentioned that the nationwide program there, but in the Philippines, this road-based transport is basically privately driven and usually fragmented, especially in Davao City. Actually, 7,000 jeepneys are registered, and actually, 5,000 independent owner there. So there's no big firm owned, a lot of jeepneys, not something like that. Usually, one owner has one or two, jeepneys, and at the most like 20 jeepneys owner there, something like that. This is the kind of scale of the business. So Davao City was studying from in parallel with this study of the PUV modernization program. They studied about the public transport system in the city, and actually the city decided to make the change happen through as a public project, rather than let the private sector do it, because in Davao City the private sector is super fragmented. So basically, Davao City decided to achieve the goal of this PUV modernization program, through the government project. So which included part of the buses, they established the depots and route rationalization, managed by the city, and let the private operator to operate through like service contract, performance-based contract, so that they can control the time, frequency, timetable, route. Actually, currently there's no designated bus stop, not bus, jeepney stops, or no timetables. It's difficult to predict when I can reach the destination. But actually the city want to modernize the public transport system in the city. So, however, surely, currently there are, as I mentioned, 7,000 GPs running in the city, which means, and 5,000 owners there, and owner like rent out their GPs to the drivers for daily business. So, kind of roughly we estimated about more than like 20,000 people are involved in this business, and now the city's plans basically replace all these paratransit system with new modern bus system, which means basically this paratransit business of jeepneys will be kicked out from the road. So like more than 20 5,000 people will be affected. So the mayor really wanted to, make modernization of the project in the city, sorry, modernization of the public transport in the city. But at the same time, she had strong concern on the impact to this, existing the sector. So actually, the project is kind of collaboration between national government and local government. But the mayor requested the national government to provide sufficient, funding source to provide social program to these affected people. So as Peshawar's case, the consultation is really, really difficult. It's true to the Davao City also, for sure. 5,000, fragmented people are there, on site, but it's even difficult where they are. Identification is already difficult because, it's 7,000 jeepney are registered in their like land transport also, office, but often it's not updated. When we see the registration and call the, them try to reach out them, but sometimes it's not there, properly anymore. So these kind of things happening on site. So the consultation activity is really, really struggling. But the city assigned actually a huge kind of social team. Actually, the city assigned city's social welfare development office to this project so that the communication on site can be done. Really, really reaching out to the people basis. So this is something which is ongoing in Davao City's project, and the project is approved already this year. So now the construction work will be started quite soon, and this like engagement activity is now ongoing, and kind of actually they had a lot of consultation, general consultation meeting with the public and also project affected people, but they are starting more on like one-on-one type, the consultation with this project affected people starting end of this month. So this, activities just started. I think, the city and we can learn from this special case also. So, but, kind of initiative of this, the social development program is really, really important. And if I can, I may add a little bit more. So because, this social program is, as special case mentioned, that sometimes we can absorb in the new system, but from our survey, actually like 20% of the owners, the operator are like more than 60 years old, and like 40% is like more than 50 years old, which means maybe we are not so sure if training to be provided to these people, or to employ these people in the new system is sustainable, or how many years we can sustain such kind of things is kind of one of the issues. So that is why the city's social development program take the kind of household approach. So the city, this social program includes financial cash compensation plus non-financial assistance, which is kind of vocational training or scholarship, these kind of things. So the approach is kind of household approach, so that the bus operators, kids or even grandkids can get such kind of training, so that they can sustain the livelihood as household. So from the strong request from the project affected people, actually this package includes even scholarship. This scholarship doesn't create income in like 1, 2, 3 years, honestly speaking. But if we think about as a household, then the education will benefit in the future livelihood of this household. That is why this SDP includes some scholarship program in as a part of non-financial assistances. Actually, the project affected people can choose, basically, roughly speaking, 3 items of from non-financial assistance. So they can choose scholarship and vocational training. Scholarship for their kids, like vocational training for their wife, and some other, like bus driving, training for the, directly affected, jeepney drivers. These kind of combination can be taken. So it's not fully started yet, but the consultation is ongoing, and we hope, actually ADB hopes this works quite well, and no one will be left behind. So that is the kind of basic idea of this program. Thank you.
all of the effort, including this SDB program, and then also compensation that needs to be financed. So then, Elizabeth, when it comes to public transport reform, financing is usually a major challenge, like Patricia mentioned before, to undergo the transformation itself. So mainly like paratransit operator who lack of financing and then access or capability to have access to the bank. So that's also a main challenge as well. So what was the innovative financial arrangement that you could observe and significant positive result based on your experience?
Thanks. I suppose when you're thinking about financing reforms, you know, money talks. You have to understand from the very beginning, and it was presented this morning, at each stage of, you know, we call it informal transit or paratransit. It's extremely well organized when you think about the money flows, you know, the unions, the owners, the operators, everybody in that system knows exactly where their money is coming from. And, you know, I say money talks because that's, you need to understand that those financial flows as the foundation of where there's gaps that you can, or sort of financing that can be designed or provided that meets the sort of value added or goals that whoever wants to do the reform wants to see, whether that's you know, safety, security, reduction in emissions, accessibility. And there's a few models that I've seen that, you know, after you do that first assessment, especially, you need to know where that money is flowing. But one of the big gaps, if you think about this, the goal around safety and emissions reduction is around the fleet itself and sort of renewing, retrofitting, replacing the fleet, you know, down the line, maybe with electric vehicles, but for now with just newer, safer fleets. And as you go through the reform process, there were some examples this morning of creating more sort of collectives or formal groupings. It doesn't mean everybody's brought completely into a formal system, but you group more of the sort of individual owner operators into collectives. And that gives them a it works both ways from a financing perspective. You have someone to negotiate with and discuss with, and provide loans to, for example, on a group basis. As you can imagine, ADB does not want to provide an individual loan to an individual driver, but there's been examples, I can think of a couple, I think it was Benin and West Africa, where some financing was provided for some local banks who then on lend to vehicle cooperatives, who on lend to individual drivers for vehicle retrofits. So that the formalization of the paratransit system enables those flows to take place where they can't take place now because it's too fragmented and nobody wants to work sort of one-on-one. Also that creating those collectives among a group of drivers, whether it's by region or some other form, also gives you opportunities maybe for bulk purchasing of new vehicles or retrofits, which again, you wouldn't do if it's just dog eat dog, sort of one-on-one. Another sort of financing consideration, Pablo mentioned it this morning, was around through that formalization, if you can move away from the gross cost contract to more of a net cost contract. So the driver, as you guys know right now, they get paid at the end of the day, what's left, you know, after they've paid their licensing, their owners, their fare collector, the police officials. And so they're working, their primary incentive is to get as many people onto that bus, that minibus as possible, which creates major safety issues. We all know these issues. So if you can move more towards that stable per kilometer basis of payment, you can do a lot more to address your sort of social safety considerations from vehicles. Yeah, you know, one other last thought, just on the financing, I think in this reform, and I mean, the examples from Peshawar was perfect. there's also, I think, always going to be a need for additional public investment in the infrastructure itself. I mean, Patricia mentioned, building roads, but if you really want a system that's going to integrate more and safer elements of existing paratransit, you do want to probably build up put some public money into better hubs, better stations, safer stations, better lighting, et cetera, especially if you want to bring in more diverse members of the population.
If I can summarize, so the collective maybe formalizations of paratransit, and then the contract form, maybe cross-cost contract, give a certainty they will have a certain income, and also a good infrastructure to support the system. And move to radar. So small initiative like digitalization. Sometimes it help to on the reformations. Before we start for the huge approach. So based on your experience in Africa, there are several digital projects that consider the paratransit, and also it helped to pave the way to reform the sector. And then how an adaptation of tools and experiences there could be transferred in the regional context in Asian cities.
Thank you. Maybe I'll start by saying that we shouldn't, put too much into the potential of digitalization when it comes to paratransit, because I think all of us have the idea that ride-hailing apps, like Uber-like apps, might totally change the sector, and this is a solution. We know it might be part of the system, but it's definitely not the only solution. As it's been said, maybe you have two kinds of paratransit. You have many kinds of paratransit, but one can differentiate between on-demand individual transport, which is basically taxi, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and what is semi-collective or collective paratransit. And maybe these are two different segments that you can address differently in terms of digitalization. For the on-demand individual, I would say transport, definitely in Asia, for instance, you have like maybe, I don't know, 70s, 80s, 90s cities with 5, 10 ride-hailing apps, which is a part, I think, which is the ongoing trend of digitalization. And this trend is going to probably continue and offer some kind of a service, even if it doesn't necessarily come with what is the expected standard in terms of working conditions, but this can be addressed also together with the platforms, etc. And there is certainly a way of partnership between local authorities, national authorities, and digital operators on this. Maybe a more difficult segment to address is what is collective paratransit. And how digitalization can help on that. Or ITS, by the way, which is not only digitalization. So what we worked on in AFD is first, the paratransit and this particular segment is mainly unknown by decision makers. Data are lacking. It's at some point invisible, not invisible, but lack of visibility. And a first thing that can be done is showcasing and mapping and collecting data through digital means. So, there have been several initiatives worldwide in Asia, Latin America, Africa, to first map and then inform passenger about what is the current routes, what are the services, level of services, kind of vehicles, etc. So we, for instance, we as AFD are a partner of the Digital Transport for Africa platform. We have the same kind of platform in Latin America, where through easy GTFS based application. So GTFS, sorry, it's the Google. I mean, it's the standard format for geolocalization in the transport sector. You can easily map the road. It requires some dozen of thousand USD for even a big city, and you can then lay out network maps, inform passenger, and even create the basic layer for a transit app that can give you the, depending on your origin and destination, which route of your paratransit, etc., you are supposed to take. That's the first thing. The second thing is about, then you can come to a second step with the real-time passenger information. We believe that as a development partner on this, what we want to provide is an environment which is a data layer and a regulation layer on digital services that allow then potential private app developer to come out with real-time passenger information. Nevertheless, for paratransit, real-time passenger information comes with vehicle geolocalization, which is an issue and is not been done in many cities, or maybe not any. And maybe the last part about, of course, the potential of digital solution is ticketing and fare collection. So there are many. So of course, whatever is your digital solution, it has to come in a context where the regulation is important, the contract model is important, the network efficiency counts. So everything that has been said by all by all speakers. And if you have sufficient basis, then you can come with ticketing systems that are made for or adapted to paratransit and efficient. So of course you have everything that is e-mobile payment, smart ticketing with very light solutions that can be integrated into minibuses, buses, taxis, etc., and allow a tracking of financial flows for owners, for drivers. But of course, this requires that the same owner, the same driver, the license owner agree for this kind of transparency, which is only possible if there have been a strong stakeholder engagement, a regulation that is adapted to that. And I would say that is a main issue more than the technology itself.
Powerful for a decision maker. There's a lot of things that we can do with the data. Yeah, that's a discussion from our panelists. Before I go for the next question, is there any question from the audience? Okay, Beltran.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you for a great discussion, and I like this session very much. We're learning a lot. Just a question to Shuji to give the magnitude of the effort and the financial effort that is required. What is the total project amount for Davao? And I think we will all be surprised by the amount of the social development plan that is allocated to that part of the project.
Okay, so overall project cost is reaching 1.5 billion USD, and like 100 million USD is allocated to the social development program. So yeah, this is really, really big for the city, right? One city to finance. But in case of Davao, this new bus system will be developed from scratch, which means we need depot from scratch. All the bus need to be actually more than 1,000 buses to be purchased, including like around 400 electric buses, and these increases the cost. That and among others, actually, the government is kind of agreed to provide 100 million USD social development package. Thank you.
My question is actually a bit similar. So I was looking also at the numbers. It's shocking. It's 124 million for the social development program for one city. But in Peshawar, it was about 10 million. And I was wondering, but I mean, the scale of the affected population of transport workers is a bit different. It seems like 1,000 as opposed to 1,100. But I'm wondering did the bank learn something? Did you look back on this and say, actually, we need so much more? Or how were you able to be so efficient in your social program in Peshawar? And I guess the final part of the question is, what does this mean for scaling these types of projects in the urban sector? So do we always have to have, at least 100 million per every 10,000 people affected, some rough number?
So in the Vogue case, we estimated the affected people. Actually, at the time of estimating the budget, it was like 24,000 people was considered to be affected. So the scale is 24,000. I think I understand that in the Peshawar case, it's like 1,300 or 500. Okay, so this is a kind of the difference in the scale of the impact because this the bus case, introducing the new bus network in entire Davao City, which is like 670 kilometers network. So that is why, the impact is all over the city, all the, GPS owners. That is why, the difference in the budget is also, kind of related to the difference in the affected people.
Just to add on that, like initially in case of Peshawar, there was initial estimation since in the case of paratransit services, we do not have exact numbers at that time. So we estimated that the city will have like more than 700 or 1,000 paratransit vehicles. So actually initially 10 million USD was allocated for this component. But later on, when we did actual surveys and we did profiling and we estimated the cost and did negotiation, then actually we concluded in approximately 5 million USD. So actually, yeah. So actually, it's all depends that what is the scale. So in our case, there were only 500 vehicles and 1,300 employees. So in case of their city, it's like a very big scale, 5,000 vehicles. So of course, in that case, the numbers would be like higher.
Maybe Lloyd, you have comment on the Peshawar?
Imran said it all.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay, maybe I have another question. Yeah. So we all already share a challenge on the paratransit reform. So my question now is, what is the key aspects need to be considered for success? In addition to, I know that stakeholder engagement, consultation, and then how significant do you think the government role in this regard? And what can be assisted by the development bank like ADB to facilitate this? And then to address the challenge as well. Maybe starting from you. This is for all.
Yeah, I'm gonna avoid answering the last part of the question. I think it's not my base there. But I'm besides stakeholder engagement and financing, what other key aspect in reform might come to mind in terms of that being as important as the others? It's to me it's difficult to say still. It's on a city by city basis, but I would really take a look at how the network is structured. One of the problems with the paratransit sector is its inefficiencies in terms of the shape of the network that it creates. It's quite an inefficient network because I don't know if the explanation was sufficient enough. It's just a juxtaposition of individual decisions that create a network. And it's never, actually the discussion never is, how do I make it efficient is how can I fit into that network? And so institutions come with a different approach, is looking at it from a systems perspective. And that switch from individual decisions to thinking in terms of different modes and how do I work with different modes. I think it's key in any case, in any type of paratransit reform. And I think that kind of answers both your question.
Okay, your first question about the key factors for success. I think this reform process or this industry restructuring program, it's itself a project. So all factors are important. So what I would say to summarize this thing, that a holistic approach is important. It is not just that we focus on only network, on only communications strategy, or the way we deal with these things or profiling. So it's a circle or it's a combination of activities. We need to do that holistically. For example, we need to have profiling survey so we understand the existing industry. If we don't understand the existing structure, then it's very difficult to propose a reliable or acceptable solution. Similarly, then at the same time, if you require to have a regular communications with the existing, but these people, what we understand in context of Pakistan and especially in Peshawar, they are very volatile people. So if you do not communicate with them, then it's very difficult for them. Then you have to country specific or city specific. There are certain requirements, like you have to deal these difficult people, so how you need to deal with them. So this is, I would say, like in what Pablo said when I have presented, that it's a holistic approach. The key to success is a holistic approach. It's not just only that we focused on financing, that okay, we are paying them. This is not the only thing. How much you are paying, to whom you are paying, it's also very important. For example, we already learned in the first session that driver is the heart of the system. But if you pay to them and you do not pay to the owner, then it's a problem. If you pay to the owner and you just neglect the driver, then it's itself is a problem. So we need to think. We must have a surveys, profiling of the vehicles and the peoples who are working in the industries, and then we propose a solution. It's a holistic approach. Then the second thing about the government role, that in some cities of Pakistan, when this BRT system were constructed and operated, they did not consider this reform, the inclusion of paratransit operators. So it created this problem. In case of Peshawar, learning from the past experiences, we accommodated those provisions and we made part of the new BRT system. So it works very well. So government should consider the social impact, that eliminating or removing these peoples without compensating them, it has a negative impact. So for government, they should, in the planning phase, should allocate a certain amount of money or financing for the bus industry restructuring program or paratransit reform. Regarding ADB, I think in case of Peshawar, they have done an excellent job. They have allocated money, and now we are in phase 2 of planning for phase 2. You already knew that. So we think that we can improve further. We can replace the paratransit, the rickshaws, with some on the test basis with e-rickshaws, so to have better system in the city. So there are a lot of improvement that can be done in the subsequent phases. But of course, it's all learning by doing process. We cannot implement what we want in first phase of the project. When we do more, then we learn more, and then we have a better system for the citizen and for the city.
So from my experience, I think, something is important, aside from, technical design, these kind of things, actually strong commitment from the leader of the city is really, really important. So because the project requires surely funding sources, human resources, and also, reform sometimes, occur some protest, so if leader feels, oh, this project is a little bit politically dangerous, then if if he a little step, then the project will be in danger. So actually, strong leadership. Okay, so let's make this reform happen so that, the transport situation in the city become much, much better. So these, strong commitment of the leader would be really, really important. And also from the role of the MDB, actually, I feel that, this reform for each city, I think this is kind of once in 20 years or 50 years, I think. So I think, this knowledge sharing, like this event, would be actually, the actually important role of the MDB, so that, the each city, get some know-how and knowledge, experiences shared. So this will be the So this event is already, kind of one of the contribution
okay.
already, right? So,
Okay.
and also, for the implementation of the each project, we need to provide, actually, the involvement of, international organization allows the government to hire, especially internationally experienced, like firms, consultants, to be engaged in the project preparation. Usually, national government policy doesn't allow to hire, international consultants sometimes. So actually, our involvement to learn from other, global practice would help, the city to develop a better project.
Okay.
Thanks. Building on a subject Imran mentioned a couple minutes ago, we've focused on this session on sort of jeepneys and up, the minibuses, buses, but and as we've discussed, reforming that sector and retrofitting it and renewing fleets will take a lot of time. And thinking of a bit of the bigger picture, especially around MYC and low carbon transition, and the fact that probably 2 to 3 wheelers are going to be around for a long time, even if whether we like it or not. And there's technologies available now to green them, and it's much more affordable for individuals to green, to sort of electrify a motorcycle than it is a car or a bus, and it comes with far fewer infrastructure investment issues as well. If you're electrifying a bus fleet, you have to think it's very complex. You have to think about the routing and where would you put your charging and how would you do your charging, opportunistic, what are your hours. But for an individual to buy an electric motorbike, whether for personal use or because you offer public transit services, it's almost cost comparable to just buy, if excluding the battery, to buy the chassis of the bike is almost comparable to buying an ICE bike, a diesel bike. And so it's something that we can do pretty quickly to green transit and sort of public transport now. And there's lots of innovative business models. You guys have probably read of them, and different, solar powered battery swap stations. And so I think that's something that we haven't talked about much, but I think it's something that could be important to integrate sort of alongside the great work that's being done.
I think I'd like to take a step back a bit. Just because also, I mean, before I joined GSN, I was with government, and I feel like what would have helped us a lot when we were in government were really capacity building. And like technical assistance is great, but there's so many experiences, and I think it happens everywhere that some external consultants come in, give great ideas, do a bit of training, and then they leave. And that doesn't address how well the persons inside government are able to really take this in. And it also doesn't really consider the fact that these people are already busy with something else. And we're coming in with, all of these ideas on how to decarbonize transport. And they're like, well, I'm trying to solve road safety now, and you're telling me I have to do that too. And now I'm just doing the job of 2 people and getting paid, in the Philippines, especially peanuts, right? So it's like there's no institutional building there. So I think something that international experts could look at also is how to strengthen the governance structure. So like really, one is training the people, but the other one is increasing the number of people who are there. So the jeepney modernization, the PUV modernization programs, excuse me, this was handled by like 5 people inside the Department of Transportation when it started in 2017. And again, that just gives an idea of really how much resources government was willing to give to it and how limited that made the entire program. So I think that's one. The other would be data collection, I think, as well. It's been a move in the Philippines recently, but not yet, very institutionalized, I would say again, in the sense that like we would typically look at vehicle speed. And if you look at vehicle speed, then looking at vehicle speed, the way we had to pitch the PUV modernization was, without on-street competition, you have less traffic congestion. But there are other ways to tackle this, ways that might be more relevant to the passengers, which would be, I care about my road safety. Of course, I care about my time, but also I care about my safety, and I care about air pollution. And yeah, and when we're looking at the drivers, again, we look at the program, and I think we're also guilty of this. We say that the program is successful because, 6,000 jeepneys have been modernized or something, but we don't really say how many of the old jeepney drivers are still in the system and benefiting from like on a per person basis, right? We look at the vehicles and not the people behind it. So I think that's another thing that we could influence.
So maybe trying to complement and answer about what can we do as development bank on Paratransit. I would say first advocate, because as it's been said, this was a too invisible system for decision makers, and in many cities, I would say decision makers don't use paratransit. Their only plan about paratransit is get rid of it, which is very much unrealistic in many contexts, not all contexts. So I think the advocacy we are doing now, and we have to do also at a higher level, is very important to get people to consider that reforming paratransit is key when tackling transport. I was glad to see that the UITP itself says 70% of the transport demand, public transport demand is done by paratransit, but the role of paratransit in UITP is not that good. So it's not that important. So I think we have to advocate continued advocacy. Then of course, I think it's been very well and successfully shown by the Davao and Peshawar project. When we come to mass transit, we have to consider this industry transition plan as both a livelihood restoration plan for impacted people, but also as a key success factor for the implementation and the success of the system itself. And I think we had a great example today for BRT. We don't have to forget that also for LRT or rail transit, because they affect in this almost the same way the paratransit, and sometimes it's less addressed in that case because the interface is not the same on the road. But we can also try to address paratransit parallelly or even through standalone reforms of paratransit, because I think the case of Yaoundé was, you're not, the only way to tackle paratransit is not only through a mass transit. First, there are public investments that are linked with the system. You have stations. Terminal stations are an issue because they are always poorly organized, messy, dangerous, a place for SGBV or harassment, etc., etc. And there's a place where the system is also organized in terms of service quality and regulation, etc. Maintenance facilities, because we didn't, but is the maintenance mutualized or not really changes the way the overall system can be regulated and organized. So we can act on mutualized maintenance facilities and stuff. Of course, working condition, training, and professionalization of the sector through technical cooperation, technical assistance program, but also through investments. For instance, in case of AFD, we have a vocational training program through a loan in Dakar to invest in training centers and curriculum, etc., for the transport sector, which is ongoing. And then obviously the fleet modernization and fleet renewal, which has been addressed a lot by development banks with not that much operations really for us. But I mean, the key is to find the bankable, efficient financial scheme to address fleet renewal in a context where the overall governance and regulation of the system is also addressed. So these are definitely complex programs. Probably sometimes the financing is key, sometimes it's the risk mitigation instruments that are lacking more than the financing itself, because public banks, etc. And of course, a union of paratransit is not the most bankable entity for an AFD or an ADB. So we need intermediaries, and we have to do financial engineering for that, which is on a case by case, depending on the segment, depending on the vehicle. It's not the same for a two-wheeler and a minivan, etc. So I think that's a whole field of intervention ahead of us that I hope we can investigate more.
Thank you, Reda. That summarized all. So key takeaways, actually, network planning is very important, holistic approach, and then strong commitment leader. Strengthening the organization itself, data collection is very important. Social impact of our livelihood, and then advocate the system, and then public investment and bankable financial scheme. Yeah, is that any more question before I close the session? Okay. Then I believe our discussion on Paratransit to an end. Yeah, we learn a lot from all of the panelists. Thank you all. I hope that it also can be beneficial, especially lesson learned taken from the reform, so then we can have an idea that what works and what doesn't work when we want to carry out the reform. Thank you.